and we are good to go.
Congressman Holmgren.
Well, good Friday to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for joining us with the In Defense of Christians. Very important briefing, seminar, roundtable that we're going to be having today to discuss very important issues that are happening in Turkey. Almost every single day, as we open the newspapers or read through the internet, we see alarming situations that continue to occur in Turkey. And it's something that we all need to be aware of. And absolutely the United States government and administration need to be aware of this as well. We have a fabulous panel in place over the next hour and a half to inform us, to give us the information that we need to be able to influence those that are around us, to make sure that we're doing all we can to protect Christians in Turkey and throughout the Middle East. I'm so honored to start this program by recognizing somebody who I respect so deeply, who has an amazing story that hopefully you all will get a chance to read or listen to at some point. But Pastor Andrew Brunson is someone that I have looked up to from a distance for quite a while. Pastor Brunson and his wife Noreen have been involved in ministry for decades, and back in the mid-90s were asked to come to Turkey to start ministry there. And they knew that was going to be difficult, knew there were going to be challenges, but also through their work saw some amazing successes of serving refugee families, Syrian refugee families and others through this ministry, and saw great successes. And then also felt threats during that time. And specifically back in 2016, Pastor Brunson and his wife were arrested. Noreen, his wife, was released, but Pastor Brunson was placed in prison and was in prison for a couple of years. Many of us in Congress and other places were praying and working to fight for his release. And I'm so grateful that he was released back in October of 2018 and returned to the United States, but has an incredible story and a deep understanding of Turkey. And so want to turn it over to Pastor Andrew Brunson to thank him for his ministry, for his service, and also grateful that he now serves on the board of In Defense of Christians. So Pastor Brunson, can I hand it over to you to give a greeting and also an invocation?
Thank you. Recently, I watched a video promoting the Turkish government, and the video flashed back and forth between images of the old Ottoman conquests and the modern Turkish army, between the conquering sultans and Turkey's current president. And the last frames of the video showed the ultimate goal, the ultimate prize. It was the Dome of the Rock, or the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And much analysis about Turkey is done from a completely secular and materialist worldview that does not recognize spiritual motivations. I think the spirit of the Ottoman Empire is rising, and this is a spirit of domination and conquest. So I think people need to be clear-eyed about what is really driving the Turkish government and what it hopes to achieve. I'd like to open this time with a prayer. Father God, I invite you into this time set aside for discussion. I ask that you send your truth and give us your perspective. Give to those who are in positions of influence in this country a correct grasp of the situation and clarity on what their part should be. I call on the Most High God, the God of righteousness and justice, the God who hears prayer and answers. And I pray for the nation of Turkey. I ask that you frustrate the plans of the oppressors, expose injustice, may hidden motives and actions be brought into the light, and strengthen the persecuted church, that those who follow you may stand faithful, even under pressure. May your kingdom come and your will be done in Turkey and the surrounding region. I pray in the name of my King, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Pastor Brunson, thank you so much. As I said, we've got a fabulous of people who are going to be sharing thoughts and perspective on Turkey, but I am so honored to introduce a former colleague of mine. He and I served in Congress together. Congressman John Sarbanes represents the 3rd District of Maryland, and was grateful for his perspective, his willingness to reach across the aisle, and his consistent commitment to making sure that the public interest was placed above special interest. He has taken the lead as the chair of the Democracy Reform Task Force over the last years and has had a significant impact there. He also serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Oversight and Reform Committee. previous to Congress, worked in the school districts, improving schools in Maryland, as well as serving as an attorney there in Maryland. Congressman Sarbanes, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your work and your dedication. I'm going to hand it over to you for a few minutes to give your thoughts and perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Holkeren. I want to thank you for your service to our country and in Congress. And we had the opportunity around these issues of religious freedom and international human rights to work with one another when you were in the Congress. I bring the perspective of the Greek Orthodox community to this challenge presented by Turkey and its treatment of religious minorities. But obviously, that crisis extends to many, many different Christian communities and other communities, frankly, within Turkey. I've had the opportunity over the last 10 years now to host a reception on an annual basis in Washington, the St. Andrew's Freedom Forum reception, to draw attention to the plight of the ecumenical patriarchate in modern day Turkey and the repression of it by the Turkish state and Turkish authorities, which is part and parcel of this broad treatment of religious minorities within Turkey, and is the problem that the panel today is going to be discussing and addressing. And that opportunity to assemble leaders, experts, scholars who know exactly what's happening on the ground in Turkey, to do that on an annual basis as we look at broader issues of religious freedom and international human rights, has given me more insight into these issues and the challenges that are presented. So that's kind of been my anchor over the last few years. You know, every so often, Turkey will act as though it's embarked on a new round of meaningful reform. Then we discover that that's not a reality, it's a mirage. But even their stated agendas of reform typically do not include reforming their treatment of religious minorities within their midst, which tells you something, I think, about the challenge we face in trying to lift up that cause within Turkey. I think it also reflects, frankly, a fundamental and basic insecurity on the part of the Turkish state, not being able to grapple with this legacy of erasing cultural and religious heritages within its own country. So the pressure that's brought to bear by spotlighting that, continuing to talk about it, continuing to lift up those voices within Turkey who will not accept that as the reality, but want to push back and establish their voice and their personhood and the integrity of their faith is something that's absolutely critical. And I want to thank In Defense of Christians for convening this panel today to address that. I want to thank Pastor Brunson for his invocation and the work that he did. And I want to thank all of you for your attention to this very, very important set of issues. And with that, I'll turn it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Congressman Sarbanes, thank you so much. And again, thank you for your hard work and your passion on this issue. We greatly appreciate it. I'm also really pleased to be able to introduce another very good friend of mine, Congressman Gus Bilarakis. Congressman Bilarakis has represented the 12th District of Florida since 2007. Congressman Bilarakis is a strong advocate of finding ways to work across the aisle to get things done. It's so important on these issues of religious freedom and persecution that it's a bipartisan issue of Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, working together to make a difference. And Congressman Bilarakis leads that effort. He was a lawyer, served in the State House of Representatives, and also was recently named in his service in Congress as the most effective lawmaker in Florida by Vanderbilt University in a study that they did. So I'm going to hand it over to a statement by Congressman Gus Bilarakis. think we're maybe having some issues there. Is anything we can do? We'll wait just a minute.
Yeah, let's invite Sarah. Sarah, can you advise if?
Yeah, it's the video is playing from Congressman Bilarakis.
We're not seeing it.
Why don't we try the next video, Sarah, and then we can come back to this, and then
Okay.
if it's a systemic issue, we can go to the videos after.
Okay. Well, I will. We'll try the next one, and I'll introduce another dear friend of mine, Senator James Lankford. Senator Lankford is the junior senator from Oklahoma. He served in the Senate since 2014. Had the privilege of being in the same freshman class in Congress with Senator Lankford when he was in the House of Representatives. And he is an amazing man, committed to serving his constituents. He's chair of the Regulatory Affairs and Federal Management Subcommittee, and is consistently looking for fiscal responsibility and transparency in government. He served in ministry to students and families for 20 years before getting elected to Congress. He and his wife, Cindy, have been married 27 years, and they have 2 wonderful daughters. So I'm going to hand it over to a statement by my dear friend, Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma.
Senator James Lankford, welcome from Washington, D.C. Wish I get a chance to be able to see you face to face, but I do appreciate very much the dialogue that you're having today about a very important issue about our relationship with the country of Turkey. The United States and Turkey have been a partner since 1952, actually. And quite frankly, for a long time, we partnered together on things like defending religious freedom. Turkey was very outspoken, like we are, that individuals should have the right to be able to have their faith of their choosing, change their faith, live their faith, or have no faith at all. And it was widely accepted in Turkish society and in Turkish government. That's a basic human right that we believe in. That people should be able to choose their faith, change their faith, live their faith, or have no faith as a basic human dignity. But in Turkey, I'm afraid that's becoming less and less so. Our ally that we've had since 1952, just in the last 5 years, has changed pretty dramatically. We've seen oppression of Christian churches. We've seen pushing out of Yazidis and other minority groups of faith all throughout Turkey. We've seen a real shift in what's happening in both in Turkish society, but especially in Turkish government. This NATO ally that we partnered together in the Gulf War, that they've stood side by side with us to be able to defend freedom around the world, now is actively taking on new fights and new battles in Libya and Azerbaijan and being the aggressor in places. This has to stop. We tried to be able to speak out in clear ways, especially when the Turks decided they were going to buy Russian air equipment and surface-to-air missiles. That's completely incompatible with a NATO ally. So from the change of constitution that they're discussing right now to radically change their government again, to the shift that they've had towards Russia, to the oppression of individuals of faith, these are all serious issues that we should talk about. And we should also talk about what our response is going to be. From the United States government, we've applied sanctions on Turkey for their purchase of Russian military equipment. We've engaged with Turkey in multiple ways to be able to push back and to be able to speak out. We've withdrawn our military contracting from Turkey entirely so that we no longer allow them to be a part of the F-35 supply chain. Rightfully so, they've lost billions of dollars in contracts. They've been isolated through sanctions, and we should continue to be able to dial that up. This is not an issue with the Turkish people. Quite frankly, we have a lot of great Turkish friends in the United States. We want to engage with the people of Turkey, but we want our friend back that was the nation of Turkey. And this is a conversation that we should have to be able to talk about what are we going to do to stand for religious liberty, and what are we going to do to stand for the rights of the Turkish people to be able to live their faith, and for the people of the region to not be afraid of their neighbor. Thanks for engaging in this dialogue, and I wish I could sit down with you to be a part of it, but I so appreciate your engagement on an essential aspect of our global politics and our global relationships, the nation of Turkey. God bless you in this dialogue.
I want to thank Senator James Lankford for joining us and for that great statement. I'll ask, do we want to go back to Representative Bilarakis or move forward, Sarah?
We can give it another try.
Okay, so let's see if we can get Congressman Bilarakis's video to play. There it is.
Good afternoon, and thank you for providing me the opportunity for me to join you here today to discuss religious freedom in Turkey. I'm Congressman Gus Bilarakis, and I represent Florida's 12th congressional district. And of course, I said discuss religious freedom in Turkey, or rather, the growing lack of religious freedom and human rights in Turkey. As a young boy, my parents, extended family members and friends instilled in me a deep appreciation of my Orthodox faith, and I strive to uphold the values of family, community, and faith on a daily basis, and instill those values into my children. I feel very blessed to be of both cultures, Greek and American, which have become the beacons of liberty and democracy for the world. It's for these reasons I'm deeply troubled by the ever-increasing lack of freedom, democracy, and respect for human rights in the country of Turkey. Religious freedom is an issue that personally touches me, as I said, as I have had family and friends who have been victims of religious persecution, not only in Turkey, but also in Russia. This makes me especially aware of the incredible importance of ensuring that religious freedom is respected around the globe. As the chair of the International Religious Freedom Caucus, actually the co-chair, and as a member of the executive committee of the Taliban Human Rights Commission, I have fought throughout my congressional career to protect this fundamental right for people who are persecuted and discriminated against by oppressive governments. Tom Lantos worked so very hard on this issue, and I was very fortunate to know him and work with him on this particular issue in Congress. Religious freedom is a fundamental right, a human right, outlined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And President Erdogan and the Turkish government continue, unfortunately, to routinely violate this human right. And there are several examples of that, some I'll go into. Turkey has engaged in persecution against religious minorities for decades, and these unacceptable violations have only intensified and worsened with time. They are persecuting, ladies and gentlemen, their own citizens, and it's very, very disheartening. One significant example of the disturbing trends of religious freedom violations in Turkey is found in the Turkish government's reprehensible treatment of the ecumenical patriarchate, the Holy See, for over 300 million Orthodox Christian faithful throughout the world. The Turkish government has failed to recognize the ecumenical patriarchate's international status. It has limited to Turkish nationals the candidates available for the Holy Synod for selection as the ecumenical patriarch. It has failed to reopen the theological school at Halki, thus impeding training for the clergy, and has impeding training for the clergy, and has confiscated 75% of the ecumenical patriarchate's properties. And also, you saw last year that President Erdogan declared that Hagia Sophia, which was one of the largest Christian churches for over 1,000 years in Turkey, was turned into a mosque, although it was a museum for many, many years, close to 100 years. So again, things have gotten worse, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen. These facts merely present several ways in which Turkey violates religious freedom on an international level. Turkey engages in religious persecution against Orthodox Christians on a comprehensive level that is not limited to institutional restrictions, but employing more discursive means, such as use of hate speech, incitement of violence, a systemic expulsion of Christians from Turkey. Approximately 2,500 Christians left in Turkey. And this combination of institutionalized discrimination and discursive persecution creates an extremely dangerous landscape for religious minorities in Turkey, and I've spoken to many in Turkey and also outside of Turkey. This type of behavior from a so-called secular democracy, a NATO member state, and a supposed ally of the U.S. is simply deplorable. I urge us all to see Turkey for what it is, a principal violator of human rights that shows complete disregard for international law and international norms. Today, I encourage us to listen to our panelists and learn the facts about the religious freedom violations in Turkey so that we can work to find constructive solutions promoting religious freedom. Thank you very much. God bless you. We truly need you, so continue to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Gus Bilarakis, for joining us. We also are honored to have a statement by Senator Thom Tillis. Senator Tillis is a senator from North Carolina, has served in the United States Senate since 2015. He is on the Armed Services Committee and the Veterans Affairs Committee, also Banking and Judiciary. He was a corporate executive for 29 years in technology and management before getting elected into the United States Senate. He also has served in many different offices, starting at the PTA level, all the way up through the House of Representatives in North Carolina, and as Speaker in North Carolina from 2011 to 2014. He and his wife, Susan, live in Huntsville with two grown children and 2 grandchildren. And it's my honor to hand it over to Senator Thom Tillis for a statement.
Hi, I'm Thom Tillis, Senator from the great state of North Carolina. Thank you to In Defense of Christians for asking me to speak today about the ongoing national security and human rights concerns in Turkey. In 2016, I became personally involved in human rights abuse in Turkey when I visited a North Carolina pastor named Andrew Brunson, who was imprisoned and indicted on bogus charges related to terrorism and espionage, and he faced up to 35-year sentence in prison. After Pastor Brunson's trial, I worked with my Senate colleagues, the State Department, the administration, and groups like IDC to advocate on Pastor Brunson's behalf until his release in 2018. While that was an important achievement as a U.S. Senator, Turkey remains a concern that the United States should continue to address. Turkey's human rights abuses by President Erdogan are unacceptable, and the United States should continue to apply pressure. Thank you to IDC for continuing to talk about this important subject, and know that I will do everything I can in the Senate until Turkey treats their citizens with respect and no longer deals with countries like Russia. Thank you so much for all you do, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. We appreciate that so much. It was so good to have all of our congressional leaders join us today. Now it's my privilege to turn the microphone over to our great leader at IDC, our president and board chair, Tawfiq Baklini. Tawfiq was born in Lebanon. Now he's a proud American citizen, but has dedicated himself to fighting to protect historic Christian communities in the Middle East, and also protect Christians throughout Middle East and Middle Eastern countries from persecution and strife there. He's received numerous honors for his work. So Tawfiq, I'd like to hand it over to you for some brief comments.
Thank you, Congressman Holmgren, and I want to thank all the members of Congress that have participated today. And would like to say only a few things about Turkey. Turkey under Erdogan converted 2 historic Christian places of worship, the Hagia Sophia and the Church of the Holy Savior in Kora, into mosques. Turkey also has violated the US-brokered ceasefire in northeast Syria over 800 times in the first year after it was signed, including 138 violations in Tel Tamir, the historical Assyrian Christian region. Turkey also sponsors jihadists many of whom are former ISIS fighters, committing war crimes against Christians and other minorities in Syria and in Lebanon. And of course, we will hear what they've done with our Armenian brothers in Azerbaijan. Turkey also exported these same militias to Azerbaijan to commit war crimes against an ancient Armenian Christian community dating back to the 1st century. They're doing also the same in Lebanon. They have their own militia in a city called Tripoli, the second largest city in Lebanon. They're supporting militias and bringing ISIS fighters from Syria and Iraq. Turkey continues to deny the Christian genocide committed by the Ottoman Empire. So this happened over 100 years ago. They slaughtered 1.5 million Armenians and 1.9 million Christians from Greeks, Maronites, Chaldeans, Assyrians. And President Biden campaigned on recognizing this officially. We asked the president to sign the resolutions that were passed by Congress almost unanimously. 99% of members of Congress have signed this, the recognition of the Armenian Christian genocide. So he should do so, and we will make sure that we will keep after this very important recognition. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank all of our experts, and I will leave it up to that. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Tawfiq. It's now my privilege to recognize Aram Hamparian. Aram is the Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee in America. He is the national point person for the organization, working with the administration, with Congress, and with the media. They have literally thousands of grassroots entities, individuals who are working with them. And so Aram, can I hand it over to you for a couple of minutes for your comments?
Thank you, Congressman. U.S. complicity in Turkey's denial of the Armenian genocide, sadly, it sits like a billboard atop our U.S. State Department, on top of every American embassy around the world, announcing, that for all our talk about atrocities prevention, for standing up for the rights of religious minorities, you don't need to take us quite so seriously as we would expect you to otherwise. There is an annual spectacle that frankly Erdogan revels in, of enforcing a gag rule on what Americans can and cannot say about a known case of genocide. Just today, Senator Menendez was joined by 37 of his Senate colleagues in calling upon the Biden administration to speak honestly about this issue. I'm following Tawfiq, who helped so very much to pass the genocide resolutions in the House and Senate. He mentioned they were nearly unanimously adopted. Coming up next, I believe, will be Andy of the Hellenic American Leadership Council. Between the Hellenic American Leadership Council and In Defense of Christians, they were great partners in this effort. Congress is fully on record in terms of the recognition of the Armenian genocide. It's time for the president to do that as well. It's important because it's the truth. America needs to stand up for the truth. It's part of our credibility, but also it honors the martyrs of this terrible crime, sends a signal to Turkey that America will check its aggression in the region. Pastor Brunson talked about the rise of neo-Ottomanism, maybe just Ottomanism in the region. Turkey and Azerbaijan conspired recently to drive Armenians out of much of Nagorno-Karabakh, an indigenous Christian land where Armenians have lived for thousands of years, home to first century holy sites. So, getting on the right side of this issue it's the right thing for America, for our credibility. It honors the martyrs. It checks Turkish aggression. And it also makes sure that the world knows that when we speak about human rights, when we speak about religious liberty, when we speak about persecuted Christians, we're serious, that we're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be bribed into silence. Our partnership with In Defense of Christians in this regard has been central to our progress. We are deeply grateful for all the work that Tawfiq and Stephen and Sarah and Richard do. And Congressman Hultgren, we're blessed to have you on board this wonderful, wonderful effort. And just want to thank everyone on the call today and look forward to a very wonderful program.
Thank you, Ron. Really appreciate your work and your words. It's now my privilege to introduce Endis Emenides. Endi is the Executive Director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council. Endi practiced law in Chicago, also was a senior advisor to our Illinois State Treasurer just a few years ago, Alexei Giannoulis, and also just has done a great job of leading the Hellenic American Leadership Council and the great Hellenic community that we have in Illinois and Chicago and throughout the country. So Endi, could I hand it over to you for a few comments?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for all your leadership, both in the House and continuing. As Aram said, today is an auspicious day to have this with Senator Menendez's letter coming out to President Biden. And let's recall Senator Menendez in the last Congress leading the charge for the Senate's recognition of the Armenian genocide. And he often said, the truth shall set you free. And I just want to point out the truth, because while I want to thank both Senators Lankford and Tillis for their tremendous advocacy for Erdogan's violations of religious freedom and human rights, it didn't start with Erdogan. Today, that letter showed you that the oppression of Christians is as old as the Republic of Turkey itself. And if we're not truthful about that, someone will come after Erdogan. I know one of our speakers writes plenty of articles about that, Michael, but someone will come after Erdogan and he will go back to that. It was not Erdogan only who's denied the ecumenical patriarch any status or religious freedom. It was not Erdogan who closed Halki Seminary. It was not Erdogan who first got involved in deciding who the Armenian patriarch is. And if we're not honest about that, Christians will continue to be oppressed. Christians are the canary in the coal mine in Turkey. After 100 years of oppression, of religious freedom, it is absolutely no surprise to me that journalists, Gulenis, everybody else has come in the targets of Erdogan. And I would hope that Senators Lankford and Tillis pick up on their admirable human rights record when it comes to Turkey, advocating for Pastor Brunson and for other advances, and reconsider and probably sign, because they didn't sign the Menendez letter. Would love to see them on. As Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Turkey, when it comes to its Christian community, showed us 100 years ago, and it's time to hold their feet to the fire.
Thank you so much, Endi. Appreciate your comments and your work. Now it's my honor to present to you and introduce to you our panelists. We have three fantastic, renowned panelists who are going to be taking questions and discussing the challenges that we're seeing in Turkey these days. I want to introduce them, and then we will go to questions with them. First, it's my privilege to introduce and welcome Dr. Elizabeth Prodromo. She is a faculty member at the Fletcher School at Tufts University and also directs the Initiative on Religion, Law, and Diplomacy there at Tufts. She is senior fellow and co-chair of the Working Group on Religious Pluralism in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute, and has served in the U.S. Commission for Religious Freedom and also the U.S. Secretary of State Religion and Foreign Policy Working Group. We also are really pleased to have Lina Aguirre with us. She's in Washington, D.C. and is a correspondent for Greek Public Television, ERT, and also the National Herald, and covers the White House, the State Department, the Treasury, and Capitol Hill. She has 15 years experience in journalism and also served as anchorwoman of Greek Public TV since 2000. And last but not least, we're so honored to have Dr. Michael Rubin. He is resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and specializes in Iran and Turkey and broader Middle East issues. He regularly teaches our United States Navy and Marine units, and also is a former Pentagon official. He has authored and co-authored several books on the Middle East. So thank you to each of our panelists that are going to join us. I'm going to start with a question for each of our panelists. I'm going to start, and Dr. Rubin, if I can address this to you first. First question, what are the geopolitical ramifications of Turkey's persecution of Christians? So I'll hand it over to each of our panelists for 5 minutes, starting with Dr. Rubin.
Okay, well, hopefully I'll take less than 5 minutes. I largely agree with what Andy said, that religious freedom is the canary in the coal mine. But if I want to take a broader, more comparative approach to answer your question, what I'm actually reminded of is Pakistan. Like Pakistan, Turkey is a country with remarkably little self-confidence and a leadership with little interest in democracy, which often uses religion to subordinate those with different cultural identities. If everyone professes the same sort of radical Islamist identities, for example, then it doesn't matter if you're a Kurd or a Turk, and you don't have to address those difficult issues which have been at play in Turkey for almost a century, if not more. And of course, the Christians will get caught in this, as well as with the Yazidis and other religious minorities. But the issue isn't simply internal. Some diplomats, and we see this at the State Department, might actually believe, well, this is an internal matter. We have much more important things to do with Turkey. They're a member of NATO. They're a key to stability in the Middle East. They can dump refugees into Germany or activate terror cells there. What we need to look at is actually, again, using the Pakistan example, the long-term implications of doing nothing. So for example, we see ethnic cleansing in Syria. We see ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, as Aram had mentioned, and as I saw with firsthand when I went in November. And we see the same sort of pattern elsewhere. What happens in Turkey doesn't stay in Turkey. And if Erdogan is allowed to eradicate the last remaining Christian communities, to steal Christian property, to interfere in the religious hierarchy, that's something we can expect to see outside of Turkey's borders as well. The other pattern, and I'll end here, is that by empowering Islamist militias, it's very hard to put that back in the box. And so we've seen this consistently with Pakistan empowering Taliban groups. We saw this first with Hafez al-Assad, and then if you remember, before the Syrian civil war with Bashar al-Assad as well, thinking that he could use these sorts of Islamist militant groups against his eternal enemies to wage jihad. We see this. We saw this with Saudi Arabia up until around 2003, 2004, until they experienced blowback. Number one, it's inevitable that Turkey will experience blowback. Ultimately, these Islamist radicals, which have been deployed against Armenia, which have been deployed in Syria, deployed into Libya, they're going to come back and look at Turkey. It's happened everywhere else. But as a security perspective, we need to realize that this is going to come on our radar screen, and the State Department, some in Congress, some in the Turkey lobby are foolish if they think that we can simply ignore this and eventually, just with good hopes and good wishes and fingers crossed, Turkey's going to go back to the status quo ante, which, as all historians know, wasn't that much of a positive element in the region to start with. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. I'm going to hand it over now to Ms. Argiri. If you could give some thoughts and comments on what the geopolitical ramifications of Turkey's persecution of Christians are.
Thank you, Congressman Holgren, for the question. Thank you for inviting me to this policy forum and for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about this topic as a member of the press who covers Turkey on a daily basis. On your question, I think that the enormous pressure, the daily challenges, and the existential threats that Christians face in Turkey today, and of course over the years, have indeed geopolitical ramifications. In just over 100 years, Turkey went from about 20% of its population being Christian to just 150,000 total Christians. And this did not just happen. The destruction of Turkish Christians began with what Benny Morris described as the 30-year genocide, and continued with ethnic cleansing and systematic persecution that continues even today. look, if Turkey wanted to be a part of the West, it should celebrate and promote its Christian and Jewish communities. The presence of religious leaders like the Ecumenical Patriarch and the Armenian Patriarch are great assets for Turkey. But unfortunately, we see that Turkey fails to see it that way. So instead of promoting these religious institutions, Turkey is persecuting them. Today's Turkey clearly is turning away from the West. Some could argue that there are purely geopolitical motives for this, but with Erdogan in power for 2 decades, I believe there are greater ambitions. Erdogan wants Turkey to be the leader of the Muslim world, much as the Ottoman Empire was. We saw this as he tried to play godfather to new regimes in Tunisia and Egypt after the Arab Spring. We see this with his relations with the Muslim Brotherhood. We see it as he keeps picking fights with Israel in order to be popular with the Arab street. It's not secret, it's not a secret that Turkey wants to become a purely Muslim state, targeting, silencing, persecuting, and systematically discriminating against every different voice. That again shows the direction that Turkey is heading towards, and this direction does not lead to the West. The alliances that Erdogan is forming all these years and the role that he wants to play in the Muslim world do not leave space for religious sensitivities or religious diversity. I think that Turkey's persecution of Christians is the best example of Turkey's determination to permanently depart from the West. At the end of the day, Turkey's persecution of Christians has two major geopolitical ramifications. I think history has proven that as the greater Middle East becomes less diverse, it becomes more dangerous. We saw this at the beginning of the 20th century, and we saw it again at the beginning of the 21st century. It also makes Russia more powerful. We are in a world of great power competition again, and Russia wants to use Orthodox nationalism. Turkey's oppression of the Ecumenical Patriarchate plays into Russia's ambition of claiming primacy across worldwide Orthodoxy. So instead of a Turkey that is a bridge between the East and West, between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, Turkey is the bridge between the political ambitions of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Orthodox nationalism of Russia.
Thank you, Ms. Aguirre. Appreciate that so much. And now it's my privilege to turn it over this question. What are the geopolitical ramifications of Turkey's persecution of Christians? To Dr. Prodromo. Dr. Prodromo.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And thank you to IDC for organizing this briefing. I appreciate being part of it, and I appreciate your giving sustained attention to the issue at hand. I'll be brief as well. In terms of the geopolitical ramifications of Turkey's persecution of Christians, I think that there are Turkey-specific ramifications, and then there are broader ramifications. In terms of Turkey-specific, the persecution of Christians will continue to embolden a process of homogenization in Turkey, religious and cultural homogenization in Turkey. And by that, I mean, as Endi pointed out earlier on, the Christians are the canary in the coal mine in Turkey, but the failure over the last near century of Turkish domestic policy to pay attention to what was happening to Christians has emboldened the Turkish state's behavior, both under secularists, Kemalists, and now Erdogan as Islamists, to target other vulnerable religious communities. That includes in particular the Jewish community in the last 15 years in particular, but more broadly. It also includes the Alawite community, and it also includes ethnic communities such as the Kurds, as well as Circassians and other. So it's a green light for homogenization writ large in Turkey. Also Turkey-specific, the targeting of Christians and other vulnerable communities means that a broader decline in human rights, targeting against the LGBTQ community, an increase in femicide in Turkey, which has risen precipitously over the last 20 years, certainly in the last 5 years as well, the silencing of free speech, the state appropriation of media in an effort to control all speech and thought, the silencing of academics, of educators in general, the imprisonment of human rights advocates. So the geopolitical implications are for a move towards the consolidation of a nationalist autocratic Turkey, which is a danger for Turkey at home, and it's also a danger for regional and trans-regional stability. And the previous speakers have, I think, alluded to that, so I won't go into detail because I know the time is short. But I do want to also emphasize that the geopolitical ramifications extend to NATO more specifically. The ongoing shift towards hard authoritarianism, I would argue even a kind of Stalin-esque style totalitarianism in Turkey, undermine the legitimacy and the capacity of NATO. NATO that's meant to be a collective security alliance where members protect one another against external threats rather than Turkey threatening members inside NATO, but also delegitimizes NATO's claims to be a community of shared values, upholding democracy, human rights, principles of liberalism and human dignity. So there are broader geopolitical ramifications in that regard. And then more globally, the emboldening or the failure to prevent the ongoing trend lines with regard to persecution of Christians inside Turkey sends a signal to other violators, both state and non-state violators of human rights and religious freedom. And here I suggest, for example, the messages to, as Michael mentioned, to countries like Pakistan and others who use blasphemy laws, et cetera, to silence free speech in general, but certainly within and across faith communities. But I also signal here the whole ecosystem of jihadist groups very active in the Sahel and sub-Saharan Africa, and increasingly in East Africa, many of whom receive direct and indirect support from Turkey. So emboldening those kinds of behaviors inside Turkey has external consequences. There's a kind of demonstration effect, a multiplier effect, based on the fact that there appear to be no consequences. And then finally, just one footnote here. I think the geopolitical ramifications of Turkey's behavior vis-a-vis its Christian communities will lead to the broader weaponization of cultural heritage, both domestically and externally by countries that use cultural heritage as a soft power tool and a foreign policy tool. And we're already seeing that in terms of countries like China and others in the region as well. But I think that's something to pay attention to, the weaponization of cultural heritage. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prodromo. I'd like to ask this next question to Dr. Rubin, if I could. You have written that the State Department has a Turkey problem. How can Secretary Blinken change America's Turkey policy to strengthen America's diplomatic response to Erdogan?
Leave it to me to be the person that forgets to unmute himself. First of all, as I answer that question, I just want to start out by adding on to what Elizabeth said briefly, because I have the figures at hand. When it comes to the increasing femicide, the figures are truly astounding. According to Turkey's own figures, the Interior Ministry, the murder rate of women has increased in Turkey 1,400%. That's not doubling, that's not tripling, 1,400%. And so it's important to drive that home. And a lot of that is because of a sense of religious impunity. I also want to just take an open pool from the audience about who Umut is going to troll more after seeing this presentation, myself, Lena, or Aram, or others. At any rate, what I want to answer that question specifically, what I want to look at is how can the Americans do this differently? First of all, make no mistake, Istanbul is a lovely city. And I was once taken in by how beautiful Istanbul was, and by the westernized Turks I would see. And I didn't fully understand, despite multiple trips, the true reality of what Turkey was coming. It's important to spend more time in Sultan Beyli than it is in Sultan Ahmet. And it was actually my determined efforts to spend time in those Turkish slum areas, or to spend more time in Kayseri or Konya or Diyarbakir or Nusaybin, out of the mainstream areas where tourists and diplomats go, which really gave me insight into how Turkey was changing. In addition, we've got to get out of Incirlik. There's no strategic sense for remaining in Incirlik. If you look at the Turkish rhetoric, we are now more hostages in Incirlik than taking advantage of a base for strategic capabilities. We have LHGs, amphibious ready groups. We have Suda Bay. We have Romania. We don't need it anymore. It's more harm than good. And it's long past time that American policy stopped using the presence of bases as a get out of jail free card for dictators. Beyond that, however, and I'll conclude with this, we have simply got to calibrate our diplomacy to reality rather than to wishful thinking. More than 20 million Turks have been born since Erdogan came to power. More than that have gone through the education system entirely or in part. And these have been people who have been indoctrinated. This idea that we can simply go back to the status quo ante, we can't afford to criticize Erdogan because that would somehow undermine our ability to influence Turkey or would shred our relationship into the future, isn't the discussion we should be having because it's counterfactual. The discussion we should be having is what is our 10, 20 generational plan to bring Turkey back from the domain of rogue regime once Erdogan himself goes, because the problem isn't Erdogan. It's 18 years of Erdoganism at this point, and it's time the State Department recognized that. Hopefully I've been provocative enough. Let me turn the floor back over.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Do want to address the next question to Dr. Prodromo. You were a commissioner on the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom. How can human rights institutions and vehicles of the U.S. government be improved to respond to Turkey's human rights abuses?
Thanks for that question, Congressman. A little bit of history is in order, about 1 minute, maybe 30 seconds. I served on the USCIRF as Speaker Pelosi's appointee from 2004 to 2012. And during that period, the commission visited Turkey twice, and also as part of one visit, did a mission to Turkish-occupied Cyprus. And I would underscore that Cyprus has been under Turkish occupation, the northern part of the island, for going on half a century now. In 2024, it'll be half a century. So we're now counting in decades and parts of centuries. So as a result of those visits, Turkey was placed first on the USCIRF watch list. And then in 2012, Turkey was designated a country of particular concern for its systematic, egregious violations of religious freedom. Since then, in 2013 and up to the present, the USCIRF has upgraded Turkey from CPC to watch list. And most recently in the 2020 annual report, USCIRF noted that in 2019, religious freedom conditions in Turkey remained worrisome. Now, I find that a very puzzling statement, if not preposterous. And I think that the failure to designate Turkey as a CPC, and this is one of the things that I would recommend, really contributes to the ongoing issues that we've all been discussing. I won't go into great detail, but suffice it to say that since May of 2013, and then again in July, conjunctural moments. In May, June 2013, we saw the Gezi Park protests in Istanbul, in the Taksim area, and there Turkish police used tear gas and water cannons. They produced thousands and thousands of injuries and thousands of arrests and arbitrary detention against peaceful protesters who had gathered to protest what was going to happen in that one of the few green spaces in Turkey. The trend line continued in 2016, July 2016. The unsuccessful coup attempt against the Erdogan government has produced since then 5 years of ongoing arrests, with literally over 100, depending on the numbers, 120 to 150,000 people imprisoned since the coup attempt, and that includes the whole gamut of human rights activists, academics, public intellectuals, private sector individuals, and members of the Turkish military, all of whom have been designated as enemies of the state by the Turkish government. Most specifically, included in that kind of purging, there's been a targeting in Turkish government newspapers and pro-government magazines of Turkey's chief rabbi, Isa Kaleva, and also the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople as CIA conspirators and Gulenists who were supposedly applauding the 2016 coup. There's been a dramatic rise in anti-Semitic language in Turkish state-controlled press by members of the AKP, but also by members of the EE, the so-called Good Party, and the MHP, the Nationalist Action, that is fascist party in Turkey. And this has contributed to the overall climate of fear and impunity for religious minorities, but also more generally, as we said, for targeting of others, those who are seen as others, for example, the LGBT community, women, etc. So what can the US do in that regard? I would say three things. One, follow US law. Number one, the IRF statute, the International Religious Freedom Statute, makes it very clear that Turkey rises to the designation level of a country of particular concern. If we look at things like the disappearance of persons by abduction or clandestine destination, other flagrant denials of the right to life, liberty, or the security of persons, prolonged detention without charges, degrading or inhuman treatment, these are all commonplace now in Turkey. So follow US law and designate Turkey as a country of particular concern. The USERF can do that in its upcoming designation, and I hope the new Secretary of State will support that. So the second thing that the United States can do, and this is making use of the broader architectures of human rights and religious freedom in the US government, the State Department and Congress should freeze the recently signed Memorandum of Understanding on Cultural Property, signed the evening before the inauguration by the previous administration, that assigns to Turkey the right to protect its cultural heritage and cultural property. Again, follow the law. Under the Cultural Property Implementation Act, CPIA of 1983, Turkey has not met a single one of the 4 conditions that need to be satisfied before signing that agreement. Since Turkey has not met those conditions, the agreement should be suspended until if and when the conditions are met. The Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs is tasked with that, and they can oversee that freezing and a re-examination of the agreement. And there are ways to bring Turkey to the threshold and hopefully become actually a protector, rather than, as many professional associations submitted in written and oral testimony to the State Department, the Turkish state is the single greatest threat to the country's cultural heritage. And then finally, a third recommendation, again, follows US law. And the new administration should actually fill the position of Special Advisor for Religious Freedom on the National Security Council. This is part of the IRF legislation, since after all, Turkey, along with so many other cases, demonstrates the organic and intrinsic linkage between human rights and religious freedom on the one hand, and material interests and security on the other. Thank you.
Dr. Prodromo. I'm going to address the next question to Ms. Aguirre, if I could. The House and Senate have sent letters to President Biden on Turkey. I wonder if you could review the actions Congress has taken to hold Turkey accountable, and what more do you think they could and should do?
So Congress has taken a number of actions to raise awareness about the human rights situation in Turkey, which is just one aspect of this problematic and dysfunctional relationship between the two countries. Both the Senate and the House and
it's 2 o'clock.
Bipartisan letters asking the president to press Erdogan to improve his human rights records and to hold him to account for his oppressive and authoritarian way of governance. Congress, which used harsh language against Erdogan and his practices, now knows that on the receiving end, there is somebody who listens. There is somebody who is ready to confront Erdogan, and he's not using back channels and his personal or family affairs or interests to set a US policy. I actually cannot recall any other NATO ally having experienced such a bipartisan rebuke over human rights and democracy from over 200 members of the Senate and the House, as Turkey did the past month. And let's remember the legacy of the last 2 Congresses. In 2018, senators forced the issue of sanctions on Turkey in the case of Pastor Brunson. And then they forced the Trump administration to remove Turkey from the F-35 program. Then in 2019, Congress mandated a new strategy in the Eastern Mediterranean that did not include Turkey through the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act. Then Congress Congress passed the Armenian genocide resolution a while ago, as Mr. Hambaryan and Eddie said. Senator Menendez led 37 of his colleagues in requesting the Biden administration join the US Congress in officially recognize the Armenian genocide. And at the close of 2020, Congress forced the imposition of cuts sanctions on Turkey. All this indicate that Congress could in fact do more if it decides. It could, for example, disband the Congressional Turkish Caucus. It could hold hearings on Turkey's persecution of Christians, or make it a major issue in the confirmation of the next Assistant Secretary of State for Europe. It could also go beyond individual holds on arms sales to Turkey and pass legislation that ties these arms sales to Turkey adjusting its behavior. But besides Congress, the new administration also shares the same concerns, that it has a different approach, which is an encouraging fact. Under the previous US administration, human rights had been a part of a more transactional relationship with authoritarian regimes, Turkey included. Now, the situation likely is changing, but the problem is that the human rights situation in this country has declined so much in the last years, and the violations are so massive that they extend to every aspect of social, political, educational, and cultural life, making it harder to find relatively easy solutions. No matter what the US decides to do or how it decides to act, Washington should be vigilant and careful not to fall into Erdogan's trap, the same way we see Europeans almost falling. Erdogan is trying to convince the West that he's taking action and he's determined to change things. The only reason that he's doing that is because he wants to show a different face. A few weeks back, he announced his action plan on human rights, but how can anyone believe what he says when at the same time he continues the press against the opponents and different voices of any kind?
Thank you, Ms. Aguirre. Appreciate that so much. I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to open it up to some questions from participants on the call. And I'll address this to each of you, but start again with Ms. Aguirre, if I may. Some of the foreign policy establishment claim that the US should not push Turkey on human rights, including religious freedom, for national security reasons. Why is this narrative misleading, and how is Turkey threatening America's national security interests?
I think that this strategy was tried for decades and it failed. If allies do not share fundamental values, their agreement or disagreement over national security interests may be temporary and transactional. That's what is happening in the US-Turkey relationship today. There is not only a difference in values, but in core interests as well. Let's also remember that we often refer to religious minorities, as Eddie said, as the canaries in the coal mine. Persecution of religious minorities almost always turns into persecution of other groups. If there is no rule of law in protecting them, how can we rely on the rule of law in protecting other groups? This is exactly what we have witnessed in Turkey. Persecution of Christians became persecution of journalists, then of Gulenists, now of American social media companies. The question is, who comes next? For too long, too many have been willing to sacrifice human rights concerns for undefined national security reasons. It seems to always be taken for granted that they are correct, and these excuses have not been challenged enough, I think. Now, the Biden administration has promised to bring democracy and human rights back to the center of American foreign policy, and I think that Turkey is going to be an interesting test case for this doctrine. If you can't press a NATO ally, a state that wants to be a member of the EU, how can you possibly press, for example, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, or Myanmar? Also, we must not forget that if there is one international actor that can apply pressure to Turkey to improve the human rights situation, it's the United States. If for some reason the US is reluctant to push in that direction, or if the US has second thoughts because of some national security concerns, then we're heading towards a dead end. Turkey needs to understand that the rule of law and the respect of human rights, and of course the respect of international law, but this is a different discussion, constitute the basic pillar of its relationship with the US, and I would argue with the rest of the civilized world. And the US should draw a red line and explain clearly that if those values are not respected, the relationship cannot improve, no matter what the national security concerns are. The US should be a role model, should be a human rights leader, should raise the bar, should open up the way for others to follow. It cannot pretend that things are okay anymore.
Thank you. Dr. Prodromo, could you take a couple minutes to address that question? I can repeat the question if you want me to. Some in the foreign policy establishment claim that the U.S. should not push Turkey on human rights, including religious freedom, for national security reasons. Why is this narrative misleading, and how is Turkey threatening America's national security interests? Dr. Prodromo.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to something that Andy said at the beginning, which is that the kinds of human rights problems that we're seeing in Turkey, and also the expansionism and the revisionism and the rogue state behaviors that Turkey is demonstrating, really in 3 continents now, in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa. These things are not that began with the Erdogan government, and also Michael mentioned this as well. And I think it's important to recognize for the United States that the conditions now have been seeded and enabled by the failure to recognize that there were earlier signs before the election of the Erdogan government in November of 2002. And rather than address those, the standard narrative was that Turkey was a secular democracy, rather than failing to recognize that secularism in Turkey did not in any way mean upholding of human rights and religious freedom. So I think it's very important to sort of put things in that context. And then more specifically, is Turkey a broader threat for US national security? Yes, we know that the connection between human rights and security interests is 2 sides of the same coin. And I think we've seen that in terms of Turkey's exportation by supporting whether it's in Libya, mercenaries in Libya, whether it's jihadis in Azerbaijan, whether it's President Erdogan and the Prime Minister of Azerbaijan calling for, and the Defense Minister of Turkey calling for a revitalization of the Islamic Army of the Caucasus, which, if anyone is familiar with that, knows was an army that was part of the tip of the spear of genocide against the Armenians and other Christians. That's the kind of language that is signaling language. And I think the language itself undermines both US interests, but also, again, the credibility of NATO. I would also say that Turkey is undermining US national security interests because, as UN and the US Treasury reports have indicated, Turkey is a logistical hub for ISIS funds, whether it's money transfers or money laundering, trafficking of enslaved Yazidi and other women and girls. And overall, it's a very permissive environment for Islamist terrorism. And then finally, there's the Turkey-Russia relationship. And the Turkey-Russia relationship effectively amounts to 2 disruptors at best, or a disruptor inside NATO and Russia with a de facto position inside NATO, something which undermines NATO's capacity and interests. So I think in terms of that relationship, it's incumbent upon the United States to address it. And that includes, by the way, malign activities, including hacking activities by both the government of Turkey and the Russian regime against US citizens and against the United States government.
Thank you, Dr. Prodromo. Dr. Rubin, do you have a couple thoughts or a couple minutes on this question?
Yeah, very, very quickly, thank you. First of all, look, to ignore the real human rights violations and to not address them is in effect putting lipstick on a pig. And you can put as much lipstick on a pig as you want, but it's still going to be a pig. The second thing is, when I did my research for my book several years back, Dancing with the Devil, which was a history of American diplomacy with rogue regimes and terrorist groups, one thing I found is that when we downplayed advocacy for human rights, for religious freedom, and so forth with countries like Iran, the actual abuses which people in the country suffered were greater. And it may sound counterintuitive, but the human rights abuses have been greater, the public executions, the targeting of Christians, and so forth, both under former President Mohammad Khatami, so-called Dialogue of Civilizations president, as well as the current president Hassan Rouhani inside Iran. The same sort of pattern applies to Turkey. If Turks feel that the desperate hope for diplomacy will leave the United States and the West unwilling to create impediments by raising difficult questions about human rights and religious freedom, then what the tactic of rogue regimes are historically is to simply hold out and give a series of hints of potential olive branches which never go anywhere, in effect what they do is they wallow in the process of diplomacy without ever coming anywhere near or having the desire to achieve the solution which those in the West want that diplomacy to achieve. Therefore, I reiterate once again in conclusion that we have to calibrate our diplomacy towards the reality of Turkish policy rather than to wishful thinking, because Turkey today looks at diplomacy as with the West as an asymmetric warfare strategy, not as a sincere approach for resolving massive human rights violations and a growing gap between our countries.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. I now have a question for each of you. I'll just ask the question to one of you. And then if one of you has a really strong thought or opinion that you want to share, that's fine as well. But otherwise, we'll get through these three questions. If you can take 2 minutes or so to respond to the questions, and then we'll go to our closing statements. But first question we have is a question for Ms. Lina Arguri. Turkey has a trail of broken promises when it comes to Halki Seminary. Where do we stand now, and why is the Turkish government so persistently refusing to allow the seminary to reopen?
So it's been half a century since the imposition of the closure of the Greek Orthodox Theological School, and the reopening has not been possible despite the international criticism and the international pressure. The US has said multiple times that this closure is unacceptable, that there is no excuse for the current situation, and that this is an issue of major importance on the scale of issues of religious freedoms. The same has been said by Europeans as well, but despite this criticism, the broken promises continue, and the refusal of successive Turkish governments to reopen the school remains unchanged. Turkey refuses to even acknowledge the status of the ecumenical patriarch, treating him merely as the Patriarch of Constantinople. And it is really difficult to understand and explain this persistence, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really benefit Turkey. It is a power game in which Russia plays a major role. It is a part of a bigger plan to undermine the role and the influence of the patriarch, and it is an attempt to change the Orthodox status quo worldwide. I think that Erdogan, instead of undermining the patriarchate and constantly trying to limit its influence, should grab the opportunity, reopen the school, and send at least a symbolic message that he respects other religions.
Thank you so much. Next question I'm going to address to Dr. Prodromo, if that's all right. It's a question that comes from Katerina Soku. Katerina says, hello to all friends and panelists. Please clarify whether there is a need for a new congressional resolution for President Biden to recognize the Armenian genocide. Do you expect that President Biden will honor his campaign pledge to do so this year, and why is that?
I hope that President Biden will honor his campaign pledge. That's my hope. And I think the appointment of, once she's confirmed, of Samantha Power as the director of USAID should also contribute to that, given her own expertise on issues related to genocide. I think it's imperative for the administration, for its own commitments to recenter human rights as part of US foreign policy, and to recapture and revitalize the US's legitimacy internationally to move ahead with the genocide resolution. I think, there are other reasons beyond the issue of Turkey as well. If we look at what's happening in other places, for example, the Chinese state's treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China, in Xinjiang, there's, again, every reason in terms of this kind of geopolitical multiplier effect for President Biden to honor his campaign promises. And to just go back a footnote in terms of what Ms. Arieri spoke about, President Erdogan has said there's absolutely no constitutional impediment to reopening of the Halki Seminary. He's been very clear, and he stated explicitly that from Turkey's perspective, it's a political issue, pure and simple. And here again, I think there are things that the United States can do, and there are things then that Turkey can accomplish. The United States can, for example, not issue visas to members of the Turkish state who have responsibility for that portfolio for reopening the Halki school. If Halki is opened and it remains open, then those visas can be honored. But there's precedent for doing that in terms of usurp legislation and policy. So there are things that can be done, that Turkey can actually meet benchmarks, and then the costs of non-compliance can be lifted. But there need to be benchmarks, there needs to be compliance, and there need to be consequences. And here again, I hope this goes back to the question about President Biden. I hope that President Biden does indeed honor his campaign promise in this regard.
Thank you, Dr. Prodromo. Last question, and then we're going to go to closing statements. But to Dr. Rubin, what would an effective approach to contain Turkey's involvement in Azerbaijan, Syria, Lebanon, and Libya look like?
I mean, ultimately, what Turkey is doing is waiting out the West and staking out extreme positions on the hope that they can either consolidate their positions against the backdrop of just the length of time that diplomacy takes, or if you stake out extreme positions and then say you're compromised, you still make a net gain. And if the West compromises, then it simply encourages Turkey in other theaters to stake out more extreme positions. So in response to your question, Turkey is conducting its expansionism for ideological reasons, and it does so because it can get away with it. The question then becomes, how do you raise the cost to Turkey so that they can't get away with it? And I think that ultimately mandates a great deal more isolation, a great deal more sanctions. While Europe is traditionally adverse to sanctions, there are actually sanctions that can benefit European companies and alleviate some of their concerns. For example, if Turkish Air, which is 49% state-owned, and much of the rest of it is owned by those in Erdogan's immediate inner circle, is sanctioned and prevented from moving into European airspace, that still leaves open the Turkish market for European airliners. And if Turkey wants to react with bluster and cut off European airliners, fine, then their tourist industry collapses. At the same time, anyone who is involved in any way, bankers, transportation companies, and so forth, in the occupation of Cyprus should be treated no differently than when the Iraqis were occupying Kuwait. We saw in the tragic case initially of Pastor Brunson during his initial detention that when President Trump imposed just some minor tariffs, what that did to the Turkish currency. Turkey is vulnerable right now. A decade ago, Erdogan was talking about being one of the top 10 world economies. Now Turkey is the 19th, and with the way its economy is growing, it will be lucky to be in the top 40 in the years to come. So I do think we have incredible leverage. We just lack the will to utilize it.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Appreciate that so much. We do have one last question that came up. So I'm just going to ask if anyone has just a quick comment on this, and then we're going to go to closing statements. But Zavarian CV asked a question: why is Turkey expanding its military existence in Middle East, Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world?
If I could take this. First of all, when Turkey cracked down on Fethullah Gulen's movement, it didn't simply close the schools. It created a foundation to take those schools over, and they have become the equivalent of the madrasas, which Saudi Arabia had financed back through much of the 20th century, especially in Africa. When it's expanding its military existence in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world, it's doing so for two reasons. First is to exploit commercial opportunities, and the second is by sparking crises or by being able to wave the nationalist flag, Erdogan can increasingly distract from what's becoming a massive economic failure back home. One of the drawbacks of being a dictator for 18 years is you have no one else to blame when your economy, basically dissolves, and that's what Turkey's facing right now. But it's also what makes Turkey extremely dangerous at this point in time.
Thank you very much. I do want to thank each of our panelists. I want to thank those who asked questions. We're going to go to closing statements now. Dr. Rubin, I'm going to turn right back to you and ask for a 2-minute closing statement by each of our panelists.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to thank IDC for having me. Basically, what I would just argue, and I'll keep it short, is that religious freedom really is the canary in the coal mine. We can talk all about different diplomatic and economic strategies to engage with dictators, to mitigate the behavior of rogue regimes and states. But if you want to see whether that state, whether that dictator has truly come in from the cold, the best metric is how they respect their religious minorities. And when it comes to Turkey, we see that the metrics are all going in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Ms. Arguri, could I hand it to you for 2 minutes for a closing statement?
So I think that, as we would all agree, the US can apply pressure diplomatically or economically to Turkey, can send its messages, can delay phone calls, can shut back doors, can adopt a stricter strategy, but it cannot actually solve the problem of the human rights in Turkey. The problem must be solved from within. What the US can do, and we see that this is already happening, is to stop appeasing, is to stop empowering, is to stop being afraid of Turkey. Only when Turkey truly realizes that the rules of the game have changed under this new administration, Erdogan may try to adapt to the new reality, a new reality that hopefully will include initially some kind of improvement on the human rights situation, not because Erdogan will change and start believing that this is the right thing to do, but simply because he will realize that he has no other choice. The world, and not just the US, should come together, form some kind of alliance, think of an effective, comprehensive strategy, and actually try to do something and not just write reports or send recommendations. There are thousands and thousands of people in Turkish jails right now, and their voices cannot be heard. The international community, and we must not leave Europe outside of this discussion, should take action now before it's too late.
Thank you so much, Ms. Aguirre. I appreciate your comments and your suggestions and wisdom on this. And finally, would turn to Dr. Prodromo, if you would take a couple of minutes for a closing statement.
Thank you. Again, I think focusing on religious freedom, as the two speakers have emphasized, and recognizing that religious freedom and human rights are not soft issues. These are actually security issues because they're intrinsically connected to the Turkish state's abiding by international law. And that means respecting the sovereignty of its neighbors. And that means giving up revisionist activities in the region and beyond. I think in particular, there's great urgency in the short term and focusing on the condition of the especially vulnerable, and by that I mean numerically very small, religious minority community. And I mean numerically minority community, which is the Greek Orthodox community, the Ecumenical Patriarchate. There are less than 2,000 Greek Orthodox Christians left in all of Turkey. And it's not hyperbole to be concerned that that community may disappear in the short term if the trend lines don't continue. So I think that the religious freedom issues are absolutely important. I think also it's crucial to recognize that there are two institutions, the Diyanet, the Directorate General of Religious Affairs, and the Vakıflar, the Directorate General of Foundations, that are especially implicated in what's happening with the country's minorities. And regarding the Diyanet in particular, to recognize that it has a $2 billion annual budget, the largest budget of any Turkish government agency. And the Turkish state has been very explicit about the Diyanet being understood as a foreign policy tool. And I go back to Michael's point, the seeding of Diyanet foundations all over the world, including the United States, with monies directly from the Turkish state. And that includes also the exportation of textbooks and trained religious leaders who adhere to the current government of Turkey's views about religious pluralism and human rights.
Thank you, Dr. Prodromo. And again, this has been a really important discussion, but it is just the start. I would say from the great privilege I had of serving in Congress for 8 years, so many highlights, but nothing more important than the opportunity that I had to work with colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, House members, Senate members, people in the administration, people at the State Department, military folks, of, again, trying to lean in and address the importance of rights and religious freedom. And when there are countries that we are dealing with that we see are heading the wrong direction, it's really our responsibility to step in and to encourage a change of direction, to push a change of direction, and even demand a change of direction. And so it does matter when we speak up, when we reach out to our elected officials. I can speak from personal experience that it makes a difference when you reach out to your members of Congress, your senators, and let them know that this is important to you, that you want them to voice their concern as well. Other nations are listening. I can guarantee you that Turkey and its leaders are listening when America and its leaders speak up. And we have to continue to encourage President Biden and his administration to follow through on the promises that they've made. This is important, and the time is now. Truly, lives and freedom is at stake. So with that, I just want to hand it over to, again, our leader with IDC, Tawfiq Baklini. If I could hand it to you for a couple minutes of closing comments.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman, again. And I want to thank our speakers, panelists, Ms. Argiri, Dr. Prodromo, and Michael Rubin. Thank you. We've spoke about a lot of ideas, and a lot of it would be used, because at the end, it's what we do next. And we will be doing a lot of work on Turkey. We'll be working with Congress and our partner organizations, with Andy and Aram, and we'll work together on accomplishing whatever we can accomplish with the Biden administration. And Erdogan, I think he only listens when there's pressure. And what I mean by pressure is to boycott Erdogan and put more sanctions, as we saw. Brunson wouldn't have been released if we did not put sanctions on Turkey. Erdogan wouldn't have pulled his forces out of northeast Syria without sanctions. And this is something we will continue to do and put more pressure. And of course, the recognition of the Christian Armenian genocide. It's about time for this to be done. And the president has promised, and we owe this to our people, to our grandparents and great-grandparents. It is a genocide that happened, and it should be recognized by the United States. So I want to thank all of you, and we promise that we will keep the pressure on, and we will work on more sanctions and boycott Turkey and stop Turkey. So thank you all very much, and have a great day.
Thank you, Tawfiq. We appreciate your leadership. We appreciate your commitment for years of protecting these important individuals and these important communities. And again, I just want to thank each of our panelists and each person who has spoken as part of this presentation today. Please feel free to reach out to IDC with any questions, ideas, suggestions that you have, or if any of us can be helpful in this important work. Again, want to wish you all a wonderful rest of this Friday and the weekend coming up. Thank you for joining us, and let's continue locking arms in this important work. All the best to each one of you. Thank you.